The connection between Indigenous Americans and Asians. Have you ever noticed the similarities between Indigenous Americans and Asians, particularly East Asians? Features such as monolid eyes, straight hair, and high cheekbones have led many to question whether these two groups share a common ancestry. Thanks to modern genetic research, scientists have uncovered a deep connection between Indigenous Americans and their ancestors in Asia. Based on genetic evidence, Indigenous Americans share common ancestors with groups from East Asia, particularly Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Indonesians, and Filipinos. Studies indicate that the ancestors of Indigenous Americans migrated from Asia across the Bering Strait tens of thousands of years ago. During their migration, they carried physical traits, languages, and cultural elements, which account for the similarities we see today. These discoveries not only enhance our understanding of human history but also open new perspectives on the connections between ancient civilizations. They demonstrate that, despite living on different continents, Indigenous Americans and Asians share common roots, shedding light on the mysteries of human migration. The genetic origins of Indigenous Americans. Indigenous Americans are descendants of groups that migrated from Asia tens of thousands of years ago. Through genetic research, scientists have confirmed that their ancestors originated from East Asia, particularly China. A 2003 study analyzed DNA from a leg bone found in a cave in China and discovered that the ancient genome closely resembled that of modern Indigenous Americans. This finding proves that Indigenous Americans and Asians share a common ancestor, making them almost like siblings in evolutionary history. Their migration likely occurred via the Bering Strait, a land bridge that connected Siberia and North America during the last ice age. As they traveled, they carried distinctive genetic markers, explaining the physical and even cultural similarities between Indigenous Americans and East Asians. Moreover, other studies show that all paternal lineages of Indigenous Americans trace back to Asian ancestors. These discoveries not only clarify human migration history but also reinforce the strong genetic link between these two groups. Linguistic similarities between Indigenous Americans and the Japanese. Language is a crucial factor in understanding the connections between ethnic groups, and surprisingly, there are notable similarities between Japanese and the Tupi-Guarani language spoken by Indigenous South Americans. Despite being separated by half the globe, some words in these languages have nearly identical pronunciation and meanings, raising questions about an ancient connection. For example, in Tupi-Guarani, the word asi means storm, which is strikingly similar to erasure in Japanese. Likewise, kaki in Tupi-Guarani means sweet, resembling kashi in Japanese. Another interesting similarity is tataka, meaning to break, in Tupi-Guarani, which closely resembles tataku in Japanese. These parallels extend beyond pronunciation to the meanings of words. Although Japanese and Tupi-Guarani belong to completely different language families, such similarities have led researchers to wonder whether an ancient connection existed between these two cultures. This could be the result of a very ancient migration process or simply linguistic coincidence. Either way, it provides a fascinating perspective on the interconnectedness of ancient civilizations. Cultural and martial arts similarities between Indigenous Americans and the Japanese. Beyond physical and linguistic similarities, Indigenous Americans and the Japanese also share cultural traits, including traditional combat styles. While East Asian civilizations are known for martial arts such as judo, sumo, and karate, Indigenous Americans developed their own unique fighting techniques. One striking example is the combat style of some indigenous tribes, which bears similarities to sumo and judo in Japan. Grappling techniques, strategic body movements, and the use of balance can be observed in both traditions, suggesting common principles in the development of martial arts. This could have resulted from similar survival needs or an ancient cultural connection yet to be explored. Additionally, linguistic similarities extend beyond daily communication to include combat-related terminology. Some words in Tupi-Guarani have pronunciations and meanings similar to Japanese words related to martial arts. While there is no direct historical evidence of interaction between these two cultures, these similarities raise intriguing questions about a possible ancient link between Indigenous Americans and East Asians. Genetic evidence of the connection between Indigenous Americans and Asians. Modern genetic research has provided compelling evidence of the Asian origins of Indigenous Americans. Studies suggest that both Indigenous Americans and East Asians descend from ancient populations that lived in what is now China and Siberia. This not only explains physical similarities but also supports migration theories. A significant study in 2003 analyzed DNA from a leg bone found in a Chinese cave. The results showed that ancient individuals from this region shared a significant genetic similarity with modern Indigenous Americans. This reinforces the theory that their ancestors migrated from Asia across the Bering Strait tens of thousands of years ago. Furthermore, numerous studies confirm that all paternal lineages of Indigenous Americans originate from Asian ancestors. This means that all indigenous groups across North and South America carry genetic markers tracing back to their Asian forebears. These discoveries not only help clarify human migration history but also highlight the deep connection between these two populations. They prove that Indigenous Americans are not an isolated group but rather a branch of ancient Asian populations.